Hello, dear friends and comrades. These are very special interviews of Without Censorship internet channel. And today we'll be talking about the most beautiful God's gift to the humanity, my favorite, Scotland. And our very special guest is the most honorable pro-independence activist I know, former MSP and leader of the true Scottish pro-independence left, Tommy Sheridan. Welcome, Tom. It's great to see you here.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Konrad.
First of all, I would like to ask you about some historical experience, which is now strangely updated, because Scotland has got new First Minister, SNP has got new leader, although not elected and not voted by the members of the party, not contested, Don Sweeney. I remember that last time he was leader of the SNP, this party noted one of the worst results in the last 2 decades. It was 23.8% in the election to the Holyrood. They lost 8 seats. And this time, socialists led by you gained 5. So do you think that so unlucky leader is exactly what Scotland wants, independence movement in Scotland really needs for now?
Konrad, I think the whole issue of leadership is complex and sometimes it changes depending on the context and the environment. I mean, we often talk about wartime leaders, and sometimes leaders during war are not necessarily appropriate for leaders during peace. There are horses for courses. There are different challenges that face each and every leader. But one thing that leaders require, I think, is they require a presence. They require some charisma. They require the ability to inspire and to explain. And in my opinion, John Sweeney possesses none of those qualities. John is not someone who inspires. He's not someone who explains. John, at his very best, is a manager, and managers are not necessarily leaders. John found during the 2003 Scottish Parliament election, when I came face to face with him in several TV recorded debates, that he was not able to match the requirements of the contest because he did not inspire, he did not explain, he did not show that he was the man that was going to take us to independence. And that's why my own party and other parties of independence scored so well in 2003, but the SNP scored so badly because people were not inspired to follow him. I think the fact that he's now back in the leadership position is an example of the paucity of talent within the current SNP. And I think it speaks volumes about where the SNP is as a political party now. It is very, very significant, Konrad, for everyone watching this particular podcast to understand that for many, many years, the support for the SNP as a political party outmatched the support for independence as a cause. That is completely reversed now. Now the support for independence as a cause is far higher than support for the SNP as a political party. They are no longer seen as a party that is anti-establishment, a party that's going to break the mold, a party that's going to break Britain. They are seen quite clearly as a party that is comfortable with devolution and the enormous trappings of devolution. Let's remember, the SNP is in charge, and as far as Westminster is concerned, in terms of Scotland's representation and the Scottish Parliament. That is a whole swathe of politicians who are very well paid, with advisors, with family members, with pensions. They are comfortable. I used to support and campaign for the SNP in 2016. I travelled the length and breadth of Scotland after the referendum of 2014, because my opinion was it was important at the 2015 general election, that followed the 2014 referendum. It was my opinion in 2015 at the general election that we should unite the independence forces behind the SNP. And I was criticised. I'm a socialist. I was criticised by fellow socialists who quite correctly made the point that I was supporting a non-socialist party. I was supporting an independence party that was openly social democratic. It wasn't a socialist party. And some people in my party at the time, Solidarity, left my party in protest. And you know what? I couldn't necessarily disagree with them in principles. It was a strategic decision. It was a tactical decision. And in my opinion, it was the right decision at that time, which was to unite behind the forces of independence, to do what the Unionists did in the referendum. So I campaigned for the SNP in 2015, and they secured a remarkable vote. Out of the 59 seats in Scotland, they won 56 of them. It was it was a political earthquake in Scotland. But I campaigned for them under a very, very clear slogan, Konrad. I said at every single meeting that we were sending the SNP there to settle up, not to settle down. Problem is, Konrad, they have settled down. They became comfortable. They've got their slippers on. They are now on this and that committee. They are now taking all sorts of sinecures and being involved in the whole Westminster Club. They are no longer the party of rebellion and the party of anti-establishment rage that was sent there in 2015. They are now, I'm afraid, useful idiots as far as Westminster is concerned. They do whatever they're told, and they don't in any way, shape or form advance the cause of independence. I can remember, and I'm sure those of us in the independence movement can recall, 2016 after Brexit, people in Scotland voted against Brexit, people in England voted for Brexit, so therefore Brexit took place, and the SNP decided to campaign against the implementation of Brexit. Instead of the SNP campaigning for what they should have campaigned for, which was to use the Brexit vote as an example of how Scotland was different from England and therefore demand our independence, they produced buses with big slogans: vote for the SNP, stop Brexit. Well, imagine people in England had decided to produce a campaign and have buses saying vote for Labour or vote for the Tories, stop independence. If Scotland had voted for independence in 2014, we would have been outraged, quite rightly outraged. How dare us here in Scotland tell England that they can't go ahead with their Brexit? They voted for that. That was a democratic will, rightly or wrongly. That was what they voted for. And from my point of view, the SNP lost its way. They still said they were going to have a new referendum. They said they promised us it in 2017. They then promised us in 2018. They promised us in 2019. It's all there. The evidence is there. They promised it. They promised it. They promised it. And by the way, Konrad, the marches for independence in 17 and 18 weren't 5 and 10,000. They were 100 and 200,000 because people had a focus. People knew that we had an aim. We had the date. They even gave us a date in 2019 when we were going to have our second referendum. And the truth is, we were conned. We were let down by the SNP leaders, who became more embroiled in the narrow identity politics of gender recognition, of the idea that it was more important to stop roads being built that were required and to not renew licenses for oil exploration, despite the fact that Scotland relies on its energy production. Scotland can be the world leader on clean energy and clean fuel, no doubt about it. But in order to develop those industries, we need to use the fossil fuels just now in order to get an orderly transformation and make sure that we create the jobs and the prosperity that is there if we do it properly. And I'm afraid the SNP's lost its way completely. It's now been clearly in hock to the small green party identity ideologists who are much more concerned about a man being able to wear a dress and describe himself as a woman than they are about tackling child poverty and the scandal of low pay. And certainly they're not interested any longer in Scotland's independence. In fact, they made it clear in an interview just a year ago when the co-leader Lorna Slater was asked whether independence was a red line for going into coalition with Labour, the Unionist Party, and they said, no, it's not a red line. So if it's not a red line, then it's not a priority for them.
Yeah, I would say that I have quite similar memories because I came to Scotland in 2014. I remember the atmosphere just after the referendum, well, no one thought that it's something failed. That we all believed. All my Scottish friends believed that time that is just the first step, that we do another one, that would be referendum in 2 years' time. And I remember this conference when Nicola Sturgeon announced that the campaign for referendum is suspended for no one knows how long. Then they fluently just came to the another question, Brexit. Then they tried to make a trap for Alex Salmond and all this ridiculous story with his process and accusations and Craig Murray arrest. Then they was focused on the question of COVID. Everyone was sure that Nicola Sturgeon is kind of a savior for Scotland, who saved Scotland from COVID, who brings us independence. And then it all appeared that our independence case is just parked in the Peter's Marel garage. How it's possible? How it's possible to lose so much? SNP was absolutely on top during all these first years I came here, and all hopes also for the from the Polish people living here have been with SNP. And now we do not feel represented by this party. We don't feel being in the circle of interest of this party. If you are not a transgender activist, you are not interested for the SNP anymore. How is it possible?
It's very sad, I'm afraid, Konrad, but you're not the only one who feels let down. You're not the only one who is now no longer important to the new SNP. I'm 60 years of age. I can remember a time in Scotland where at elections, most people would argue that you didn't count votes for the Labour Party. You weighed them because the Labour Party controlled the political environment. They were absolutely massive. And what happened is the Labour Party became very arrogant. The Labour Party became a party that didn't care about its core any longer, didn't promote socialist ideas. It became Blairized. Tony Blair became the darling of London and the establishment. He became a safe pair of hands for the British establishment. So socialism was ditched and Labour became the pro-war party, as the illegal Iraq invasion showed. And what happened is they imploded. The SNP were the great benefactors of that implosion after the referendum of 2014. And the truth is, 10 years on, almost from the 2015 general election where the SNP swept the board, 10 years on, the SNP have started to take for granted their core vote. Their core vote was young, working class people who believed that Scotland would be better on its own, that people who live in Scotland would care more about Scotland and take the decisions that affect Scotland, not from a xenophobic point of view or a nationalistic exclusionary point of view, but very much with the open hand point of view, with an idea that Scotland was at its best when it promoted its communitarian values, when we had public ownership of our water, and that we defended our publicly owned National Health Service, that we promoted the idea of our railways being in public hands. These are all policies which are very popular in Scotland: free prescriptions, free education. Scotland is not England. Scotland is far to the left of England. It is not stuck in the privatisation era of Thatcher. It is a country that believes in the beauty of having certain things within public hands, like our water, like our health service. We believe that things like that should be run for the best possible outcomes, not for private profit. And yet what the SNP has become is a party that looks inward, a party that looks towards that small, very, very activist base that thinks that dressing up and being able to describe yourself as a different gender is enough. Legally, you should be able to do that. That a man can put on a dress and legally be described as a woman. I believe passionately in transgender rights. I believe in women's rights. I believe in the rights of all minorities. It is there in the Equality Act of 2010. All of those rights are protected. They are named and protected. The idea that we need to make it easier for someone to go through the process of changing their gender is a minority cause. Because it is quite clearly the case that if someone does wish to change their gender, there is a process for doing that. It's there, it's protected in law. It takes a bit longer. It should take longer. It's not changing the shed in your hair. It's not changing your fashion or your style. It's a change that is going to affect your whole life and your whole future. So you should be 18 before you're allowed to do it. The SNP are saying, no, you can do it at 16. Konrad, when I was 16, I didn't even know what I wanted to do in my life. I certainly wasn't mature enough to be able to make a decision to change my gender, for goodness sakes. This isn't about whether you wear a leather jacket or a fur jacket. This is about changing your whole life. The idea that you should have to be 18 and have medical advice before you do it, I support that. I don't believe that you should be 16 and not require any medical input before you change your gender. And I've got to say, I don't think that I'm an extremist. I think I am on the same wavelength as the overwhelming majority of ordinary people, which is to defend the rights of minorities, but also to make sure that there's proper regulation. The SNP and the Greens have forgot all of that. They've turned their back on the majority, and they are more concerned with these minority views than poverty and inequality and tackling the housing crisis in Scotland. And of course, the biggie, which is to promote independence. Independence hasn't been pushed or promoted or developed one iota by the Green SNP coalition in government over the last 5 years. And that is a very sad indictment of what they actually represent. And I'm afraid John Swinney represents nothing more and nothing less than continuity, a continuation of that type of politics. We need a new political force, Konrad. Whether that force is going to be Alapa or not, only time will tell. But there needs to be a new force that fills the vacuum, because the SNP under its current leadership simply isn't up to the job.
Yeah, well, definitely speaking about the minority rights, the point is not about the treat to the minority rights, because, as you said, they are quite safe facing the present level of legislation or previous level of legislation. But the point is that these minority cases are used to introduce censorship, to limit women's rights in Scotland, to reduce the freedoms of speech, freedoms of meeting, freedom of political activities. It's not the point that I can see that, for example, people from transgender community are acting against or for some point of view. No, that they're activists. They're activists of some minority parties. They are politics from the Green Party, which used to be, you know, small and nice one, strongly pro-independence, pro-social one, and it's not like that anymore. The Scottish Greens now present themselves as the gender party. As you said, they mention no red line about the independence when talking about cooperation with the unionists in the future government and future Scottish Parliament. And I remember that I always understand that environmentalist green movement is the, definitely pro-peace movement. That is the spirit of the Faslane peace camp. That is the spirit of the Rainbow Warrior against militarization, against the military-industrial complex, against the threat of the global war. And now it's just another part of establishment, just finding some new nice niche about the transgender and forgetting about anything related, for example, to the wider perspective of the Scottish environment.
There's no doubt about that, Konrad. I share your concerns about how that party has become quite clearly, from being a party that was anti-establishment, a party that's now part of the establishment, a party that apparently now accepts NATO membership as well. I mean, how can you be an anti-war and peace party and want to be a member of NATO? It's an oxymoron. NATO is an aggressive, war-inducing organisation. It supports, it starts, it prosecutes wars all across the world. It is a very militaristic, anti-peace organisation. Being a member of NATO and being a supporter of peace are contradictory terms. You just can't be both. And yet that's what the Greens are now saying. So from my point of view, they have become a party that is very obsessed with minority identity politics rather than class politics, rather than looking at the bread and butter issues of how people live their lives, about how people can't afford rents and mortgages, about how people are working longer hours for less wages, that we have a cost of living crisis which is utterly crippling in terms of supporting and paying for energy bills, so having enough to take your family on holiday. These are the things that matter to people, ordinary people, but they've become obsessed with these gender issues, which quite frankly are an extreme minority issue. And as I've said earlier, if there was a case that there weren't legal protections for transgender community, I would be the very one saying we need legal protection. But the legal protection is there. It's enshrined in the Equality Act of 2010. There is no necessity for a new Gender Recognition Act whatsoever. And I think it is wrong to look at the question of a woman from anything other than a biological, scientific point of view. A woman is a woman, and a transgender woman will always be a transgender woman. You can't become a woman. Someone who doesn't have a uterus, someone who doesn't have reproductive organs is not a woman. That's just a fact of life. And you're quite right. Saying what I have just said over the recent period has led to an absolute avalanche of abuse by a minority of people who would have you refusing to speak. They would have you shut down. They would try and stop you saying that things. I mean, imagine how far we've gone, Konrad, in society. We're stating that a woman is a woman is something that becomes outrageous. And when in actual fact, it's the most reasonable statement that you can make as a human being. It's biology, it's science. Don't deny it. State it clearly. Don't be put off by the fascistic transgender community that would try and deny science and deny reality. We have to stand up for these things because that is the majority view of our class, and there are many more things much more important.
I believe that's the base. That's the question of the common sense and the question of the essence of humanity. That we try to just think rationally and tell the truth. But of course, apart from these fundamentals, there are also some questions of tactic. And I would like to ask you because, in 2015, I was leafleting for SNP as well. I thought that it's the only rational choice we could make that time, just after the referendum. Now I believe that we are all somehow in many ways supporting or advising our friends from the ALBA party. But in the same time, we have to remember that all these non-SNP parts of the pro-independence movement face the accusations from the hardest SNP supporters, whatever doing that on goodwill or not, that any kind of challenging SNP from ALBA party, from Independence from Scotland party, from the sovereignty, from any kind of grassroots movement active in the streets of Scottish towns, that any kind of such a challenge is a treason, is standing together with unionists, that the only way is to just join John Sweeney in his pro-devolution and millenarist positions and just wait. And just wait for the right moment and wait for the next election that would be, these elections. So what could do this not SNP independent pro-independence parties, movements, organizations, just to break through this wall of impossibilities, of the wall of only pro-SNP standing. If we have to go further, we have to challenge the SNP leadership.
I agree, Konrad. For many years, I campaigned, as I said, and I said that the SNP should be lent your vote, that we as socialists should unite behind an SNP vote. And as I said earlier, I lost some good friends and comrades who thought I was wrong, and they believed that we should continue to support socialist parties instead. I was quite clearly aware that the SNP was not a socialist party. They didn't support a modern democratic republic. Many in the SNP continued to believe that we should have a monarchy. Many in the SNP believed that we should continue to have a membership of NATO. Many in the SNP believe that we should continue to be members of the European Union, despite the vast transformation of that organisation into a pro-American militaristic organisation, which is becoming more and more right-wing by the day. Do you know what? I could swallow some of those very difficult pills because I believed the SNP was passionate about independence. I now can no longer swallow those pills because I don't believe the SNP is passionate about independence. In other words, I was willing to set aside the fact that those issues, very, very important issues, I was not in tune with the SNP on those issues, but I was in tune with the SNP on the question of independence. Now that the SNP clearly is not a party of independence any longer, I am going to be passionately supporting other organisations, individuals and movements which are not for the SNP, not while they continue to promote the position that they're promoting. I am saying loudly and clearly that the SNP has become a barrier, not a bridge, to independence because their leadership are comfortable with devolution. Their leadership are comfortable with the massive salaries and the beautiful frilly pensions that they get as being MPs and MSPs. They've been bought off as far as I'm concerned, and they are now in the way of the journey towards independence. We should be supporting other parties, other movements instead of them. And for those who say, oh, but wait a minute, you're dividing the movement. It reminds me of what people in the Labour Party used to say when they were asking you to vote for a pro-war, pro-privatisation Labour Party. Would say, you need to vote Labour because if you don't vote Labour, you'll let the Tories in. You're playing into the hands of the Tories. That was a stupid argument then, and it's now a stupid argument to say that we should vote SNP regardless of the fact that they're no longer a party of independence. If anybody passionately believes in an independent Scotland and a socially progressive independent Scotland that puts the interests of the working class first and foremost before profit, you can no longer justify, in my opinion, backing the SNP elections. I'll be backing Alapa. If there are good independence candidates who are standing as independents, I will back them. I'm no longer willing to misuse my vote. I think it was right to use my vote in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2019. I gave the SNP my votes. They have abused my trust. I am not giving them a vote again.
I would like to conclude with the question about the future, because even before coming to Scotland, I was also write a lot about Scotland. I try to convince people why the case of the Scottish independence is so important, not only for this part of Europe, but the whole wider picture of the international safety, security, so on. And people in Poland often ask me, okay, so why you so involved? Why are you so engaged? Why do you think that it's so important, for example, for the Poles? I would say that it's something absolutely fantastic to be a part of creating something really new, of being a part of creating the new state or renewing the state, the old historical state, which could be social progressive, which could be completely different than the other neoliberal Western European countries. And now, with all these hopes, I can see that, well, Ian Blackford, after he would like Scotland to join NATO, now he himself would like to join the House of Lords. I read that SNP has no clear position about the monarchy. I see how the SNP and formerly Green government would like to do nothing exactly about the shutting the last important Scottish industries and sectors with the raffinery as an example. I can see that these people would like Scotland to be just another United Kingdom, being a part of NATO, being a part of the European Union, with the German-English monarchy, with the establishment and ruling class exactly the same like in the United Kingdom. So what is the case? So what we need independent Scotland, it does could be a copy of the United Kingdom. I want new, real, true Scotland.
Konrad, I couldn't agree with you more, my friend. I was involved in the early stages of the Yes campaign, and way back in 2013, and I was quite concerned that a lot of the thrust of the campaign seemed to be vote yes, nothing will change. There seemed to be a fear among the official Yes campaign not to overpromise, not to raise big issues, because you didn't want to frighten people away. And my opinion was, well, wait a minute, we're asking people to vote for something new. And if you're going to vote for something new, you need to give people reasons to vote for something new. And therefore, we set up the Hope Over Fear campaign, which was very grassroots and was designed to put a radical vision of an independent Scotland, an independent Scotland that put people before profit, an independent Scotland that promoted a non-nuclear weapon Scotland, an independent Scotland that argued for the public ownership of the oil and the gas industry in order to make sure that the living standards of ordinary Scots would be higher, much higher, and more pensions, better wages. The idea that we could use, for instance, the working poor description no longer, that we banned that from the lexicon of our daily conversation, because I don't think working poor is a term that we should allow, because if you're working, you shouldn't be poor. So that whole idea was what, through Hope Over Fear into the campaign, hundreds and hundreds of meetings, we spoke to thousands and thousands of people, and I was prepared, as I said earlier, to put up with the negative aspects of the SNP as a political party, as long as they were going to be the bridge to independence, the vehicle to independence. Konrad, the truth is now, as we sit here in May of 2024, the SNP is no longer a bridge to independence, it's a barrier to independence. The SNP is no longer a vehicle to independence, it is actually a stop sign. It is actually a party that thinks devolution with a wee bit of thrill here and there, a wee bit of extra power, is good enough. It's not good enough for me, Konrad, because we cannot fundamentally change the lives of ordinary people without the economic powers to do so. And what the SNP is going to find is that they are going to more and more be put on the platform where people will say, what's the score with these cuts? How come we've got less carers? How come my gran can't get a place in a care home? My gran can't get a place in care? How come the schools are deteriorating? How come the transport is getting less and less reliable? How come the universities are getting more and more overcrowded with overseas students because they're the ones that are paying the fees? How come our health service is becoming under more and more pressure with higher waiting lists, with accident and emergencies over capacity? These things are pressures of economic cuts. We have austerity at a Westminster level being passed down the line to Scotland. And the SNP used to say, oh, well, we're going to manage it, but once we get independence, things will be different. Now there's no prospect of independence as far as they're concerned. It's off the agenda. So they are to blame for passing on Westminster cuts. And I'm not prepared to support a party that does that. I want a party that is absolutely 100% for independence, which is why, as I say, I joined the Alapa party, and I would encourage others to do likewise, or to get involved in other independence parties or movements, because the SNP, unfortunately, is now a barrier, not a bridge.
Yeah, I definitely agree that SNP is now at the dead end, but I strongly also believe that Scotland, that Scottish independence movement is not, and I still believe that independence will be here for Scotland the Brave. So yeah, that's
Konrad,
no other choice.
Definitely. I would like to finish on an optimistic note, Konrad, because I clearly believe that the cause of independence is bigger than any one individual, any one political party. It is a cause which has grown in the hearts and the minds, particularly of the young people of Scotland. I remember the statistic from the referendum: under 34-year-olds, 16 to 34-year-olds, 69% were supporting independence. That's nearly 70%. Those young people who are now no longer 16 to 34, but are now in their 40s, they're not turning around now and saying they don't support independence any longer. they're just as strong supporters. It's just that they're not being given the opportunity to express that support. And that's what we have to do now. We have to drive forward the cause of independence and the desire to build a new and a better Scotland, a Scotland that banishes nuclear weapons and banishes poverty.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Let it be. Dear friends and comrades, this has been a very special interview of Without Censorship internet channel. Please follow us on X, former Twitter. Please join us on Telegram. Please find us on Facebook, and of course subscribe our YouTube channel. This interview would be, of course, published also not only in English but also in Polish and in Russian. And I hope we will meet again soon with our very noble guest, Tommy Sheridan. Thank you very much once again for joining.
It's a pleasure, Konrad. Thank you.
See you.